First, I wondered if maybe they should.
I would like to call the Policy Resolution and Legislative Committee of the Whole to order.
Good dialogue.
During this meeting, board members will, in many cases, be hearing information presented to them for the first time. Their responses will be, in many cases, extemporaneous and should not be considered either their final opinion on a matter, nor should any opinion expressed by an individual board member during any meeting be considered the opinion of the board as a whole, unless it is presented by the presiding officer as such. First item on the agenda here, besides the call to order, is, I guess I should say second item on the agenda, is the approval of the minutes from August 13th, 2018. I seek a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is the legislative update. I had many things to pick from, but I chose to share with you some information about a poll, a political poll, gauging voter feelings about education. And this particular poll was taken by Phi Delta Kappa, an organization of professional educators that has released a nationwide poll this time of the year that attempts to capture the American public's attitude toward public education. For the 19th consecutive year, Americans have named lack of funding as the biggest problem facing their local schools, and by a higher margin than in recent years. Nearly 2/3, 66% of those surveys say teacher pay in their community is too low, while just 6% say it's too high. Further, for the first time since the question was asked in 1969, a majority of respondents, 54%, say they would not want their child to become a public school teacher, often citing poor pay and benefits among their reasons. A couple of other things I wanted to share, and you can find this on the WASB Legislative Update page if you want, and you can download the entire poll if you want to see everything. But another item of interest, half of the respondents favor raising taxes to accommodate the additional need. And not surprisingly, sharp partisan and ideological differences are apparent in the results. I guess we knew that. Most adults surveyed continue to think well of their community's schools. 43% give their local schools an A or a B grade, compared to just 19% for public schools nationally. The full report digs deeper into these topics and others, and you can download the full report, as I said, at the WASB website under the legislative update. Number 4 on our agenda, Policy 5706, Prohibition Against Harassment and Discrimination. Get to that part. And no action on that tonight, but on Policy 5705, student discipline is listed as action possible. Now, we've grouped these policies together for quite a few meetings so that we could talk about them if we wanted to, but I'm getting the feeling that these are policies that administration hasn't dug real deeply into yet, so unless you have some suggestions for these, they're not listed as for action tonight. I kind of want to get down to the discrimination harassment form and maybe give our feedback on these other policies, but give administration time to dig through those also.
Beth, could we just clarify? We recently took action on policy 5706, so your statement that we're not taking action, it's
No, I
been
meant-
recently taken though.
I'm sorry, I was referring to A through E.
No, I
on our
understand, but
agenda.
as a preface, you stated we weren't taking action on 5706, and I just want to be clear for anybody that might not have been
Thank you
at
for
a
clarifying that.
previous
Sorry, I
meeting.
misspoke. Thanks.
So I guess the only question I have is that, and I've asked this probably 3 or 4 times previously, but is there anything within 5705, 5707, 5708, or 5750 that administration, right now, I understand that they haven't dug deep into these. Is there any clarification that is needed from us on any of
I
it?
think Angie has some comments about that.
Sure. For sure on 5750, which is the expulsionary procedures, we need to add firearms in there. That's actually in the law that we need to have that in there, and it's not stated specifically, so that's something that I would word and put in there for next time, and then to have some action taken on that one, just to make that specific
Okay.
change. On 5708, that's a very lengthy policy. I don't know how many pages it is. I think 9 or 10. I would request that I could have some time with the administrators to really dig deep into that one. I think some things have changed since that was revised.
Yeah, it's been 10 years.
It's been 10 years, so things have changed in the educational world. I don't think just my eyes on this is good enough. I feel like I need time with the administrators to really look at that policy, see what suggestions they have, and then bring it forward to
Sure.
the board.
So, and that's totally fair, I mean, that makes sense, but is, absent of that more in-depth analysis, we are in a school year now. Is there any confusion or anything that is preventing us from leveraging all of the potential disciplinary actions associated with this policy, with 5708, I think it was the expulsion policy,
5750.
I'm sorry, 5750, I just want to make crystal clear on that we got what we got right now. We think we can improve it. There's some things that have changed, but we can act on these should the need arise in any and all schools.
Correct, yes.
Perfect.
I would have to imagine that not from an administrative standpoint, but just from a in practice standpoint, that 5708, when it talks about the ability to remove students from class and when to remove students from class, that's going to be impacted in practice by whether there's some place to remove the students to, different from just the principal's office.
Correct.
Because the principal has like a principal job to do.
Yeah.
And I have to imagine from the teacher's perspective, they are often, at least some of them are probably often hesitant to consistently or continually remove a student from their class, knowing that they're just going to be going to the principal's office if we don't have a decent alternative for those students.
And I think some schools are working on that right now, coming up with a decent alternative. You're looking at resources at that point too. But there are pockets of people working on it. That's why I really want to get the administrators together and look at this and see what currently is happening in schools. When you're looking at removing a student from class, do we have some good alternatives for that? And if not, what can we look
So
at?
that might be some useful information for us to learn, what is available at various schools. At this
Sure.
school, it's not a problem. We've got a full-time social worker, and that's where the student is removed to. At this school, we've got a big problem. We don't have any places to put the student when they're removed from class.
Right. And resources are different at
Right.
different schools.
And I think we need to recognize that even though there may not be a quote good alternative, we may have to act on these policies, even if there's a less good alternative, whatever that may be. I have no idea what, but I just want to make sure that we're not going to sit here with our hands tied and let these lay dormant like they have really for the last few years.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, short-term removal, each school has a place to send that child to, right?
A lot of
Or-
times it's sent to the office.
Okay, so it is off in the office for short-term, but that's also defined as probably 30 or 45 minutes to however long in that given day. And or do they sometimes go into multiple day, the short-term?
That would be in school suspension.
Yeah,
That's-
no.
Yeah, so it is a very
But
temporary.
I'm still left as a teacher then, thinking, if on the one hand, this is disrupting my class over and over, and it's hurting the learning of all the other students in my class. On the other hand, when I send them down to the principal's office, the principal has a job to do, and now I'm disrupting my supervisor's day. And if I do it multiple times, I'm not only disrupting my supervisor, am I suggesting that maybe I'm not doing something to control this student, and why am I pushing them off onto the principal who has their own job to do? And I just think it's not ideal for the teacher, certainly, to have to be.
Multiple times, and we're starting getting into it should be a long-term.
Yeah.
Something like the peer program.
So it should be used to a peer program, which we don't have enough space for.
And I think we're going to give teachers more skills with like that ACES training that's coming up and some of the different trainings we're looking at for next year for our staff. Is that going to remedy everything? No. I mean, we know that there's kids out there who need more than just that, but we're really looking at alternative placements. The board has stated that you're in a place where you want us to really extensively look at alternative placements, and we're taking that very seriously.
And it might be different in different settings as far as elementary versus secondary.
Mhm.
I know in my school, we have a room that's just for that, and it's staffed by a different person each hour.
Yeah, I was
And there's
thinking more of the
specific
elementary
things.
setting where
Yeah.
Right.
maybe some of the bigger schools do, but some of the smaller schools don't. And so where does the student go? And there's a real incentive then to not remove the student from the class, frankly.
Well, I certainly hope that that's not the prevailing thought out there with the teaching staff, because when they identify that need and they think it's serious enough to send a student to the principal's office or wherever that destination is, that's all part of the process, right? I mean, I, as a teacher, I escalate it when I think I've done and used all my resources. I escalate it to that principal, and I trust that they're going to deal with it based on whatever tools they now have in front of them. That's just the evolution of it.
Don't you think as a teacher, though, you're going to have maybe a bit of a different standard if I have to place this student in my principal's office versus I have the opportunity to place this student into a location that's actually designed for that, a social worker who is
Sure.
there
Where he's gonna get
specifically to
help.
work
Yeah.
with that student. I just think you're going to be much more willing to follow the policy if you actually have a good alternative as opposed to just
Well,
sending them
no
to the
doubt.
principal's office.
I mean, I trust that they're gonna use their professional judgment. And like you said, when it's somebody disrupting 30 other kids time after time after time, they're gonna take the action, and then it's up to the administration to take it from there. That's, it's not ideal right now, but,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
that's
we
where
have
it's
what we have.
traditionally been forever in schools. And that's something I want to investigate a little further to
Okay.
see if there are some alternatives out there that not all the schools know about.
So, thank you.
And Angie, my question would be, what about the parent who will not allow their child to be tested or evaluated in any form? What could a school do with a child who really has needs? Do you have to take them to court?
I don't know that that's ever been the case.
Extreme.
I don't know if we legally can take them to court.
No, I think if they don't give permission, Judy, I'd look at you a little
Yeah.
bit, but I think if they don't give permission, we can't test, and so then we find whatever resources that we have available outside of the special education realm, and we move those toward the, supporting the child.
Teresa, parents have a constitutional right in how they parent their child, and the district can't trump that.
Well, that was my point. I mean, when I was teaching, we several times had children that the parents wouldn't share any information that what was going on, wouldn't share what the counselor was working on. In the meantime, there was no communication, and we were left with a child that often we worry about that is so disrupts everyone's learning, and it took until third grade before the parents finally, and I just wanted the rest of the board to realize that just because we think it's a good idea, parents have the right to say no. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thank you for adding that.
I really appreciate the attention that we're giving to this whole subject, but I want to raise the issue again, that once this form gets reported and a bullying or harassment issue gets reported, what happens is it starts a lot of wheels in motion. There's a lot of energy that's going to get put into it. It's going to take time. And I'm still concerned about the situation where someone will want to harass somebody else by filing a report. There's nothing in here that said, anyway, there's a clear statement in 5707 about non-retaliation. But I don't think it's retaliation if what happens is we find out that the report was not made in good faith, and in fact what's happening is it's an attempt to bully somebody else by using the system. And I think there should be some statement about that, both in the reporting form and somewhere in the policy, so that you're not guilty until proven innocent, and there's
I
some
don't
kind of
have it right in
attention.
front of me, but didn't we do that with the bullying form?
I thought we did.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah, I believe we do have that. Yeah, I don't remember if it's in the policy, and I don't know if you have it there. in
It's
front
not
of
in
you.
the policy, at least I couldn't find it.
There is a statement that false accusations, I think is the phrase that was used, that those would be dealt with also.
So we should mirror it in this, is
It
what you're
should be
saying.
in the forms and, yep.
Yeah, so I think we want that in 5707 as well.
And I can put that right on that student behavior complaint form that we have up on our website
Mhm.
now.
Yep. Angie, I know in 5707 you'll probably be checking the second paragraph there, the legally protected areas. Those could have changed since 2014. And they, of course, legally protected might not cover all potential. There's nothing about socioeconomic status. We don't want poverty shaming, for instance. And there's nothing about gender identity, but that depends upon who's defining sex and sexual orientation. It's not precisely the same thing, but as we once saw in the Dear Colleague letter, it could be fit under those definitions. I tried to look on the DPI website and I couldn't find anywhere where they defined the terms that they were using. When they used race, they used ethnicity. We don't have ethnicity here, but that could be understood using some of the other terms. So again, I think, just make sure you look over those and that we get everything covered, because we don't want any aspect of a child's identity or identification to be used as a weapon against them.
So I think you've got the gist of what our suggestions are for changes before we delve into them deeper. Do we want to go?
There are some lots for now, so just find them.
Do we want to go to the form?
Sure.
So at the end here, you've got,
The two bullying forms. I don't know where those were from, but the top one is the discrimination and harassment complaint form, and that's the one that we currently have up on our website.
okay,
Mike Schwei and I have been talking about this because this could be viewed from a student standpoint or an employee standpoint. And really what we've come up with after a lot of conversation is not a whole lot of changes, but we're hoping to get your input about that as well. If you look under number 3, which is indicate the type of complaint, there's discrimination and harassment or bullying and hazing, and then there's other on there. And we weren't sure what that other quite meant. So we were questioning that.
And what I will tell you is that on the HR side, twice already we've had people use other, and it made it very ambiguous what their complaint was.
Could it be retaliation?
Yeah, they probably used nothing because they didn't know what to call it. So
Yeah, but that created
communication.
actually, they shouldn't have been using the form at all in both cases.
Okay.
oh,
It was more, they wanted to jump either to a grievance, which it didn't qualify as, or to bullying, harassment. This was the closest they could find, but they really should have gone through the chain of command to their supervisor and then to HR, and with just a letter of concern about a situation occurring on a campus. So people are defaulting to this form because of that other, and we don't intend that.
and because it's a form that can be filled out.
Yeah.
Well, what should they be using then? Because it sounds like they need to be using some form, and if that's the best option, then there's a form that's lacking.
This form was intended to address discrimination and harassment, and
And
my
bullying.
position would be that that's all it should address.
Yes.
And then, you're right, we could have another form for a complaint procedure, a more general complaint procedure.
Well, along the lines of it should only address discrimination and harassment, now that we have a better bullying incident form too, it wouldn't really be right to use this form for a bullying reporting.
Unless it's an employee. And that's kind of where we were crossing stuff out and then putting it back on.
Oh,
So the
What we recognize- go
the one
ahead.
that I created is student specific, so about students.
So maybe we would, well, I mean, you could make it clear, I suppose, on here.
Yeah, just
We
by the
had
title.
That if it is student bullying, use,
The other one that gets
We were
confusing.
haggling about separating those out and having an employee form and then having a student form, but what we quickly concluded was, but you may have a case of a student-employee interaction that one or the other is being harassed or bullied.
I think then the target would use whichever was specific towards them. If they're a student, they'd use the student form, and if they're a staff member, they would use the adult form.
And that should be in the title of the form,
Yeah.
for students, for
And
staff.
by where you put it, does it make it more likely that people get to the right form? For instance, you have that on every website for the student one, so
Yeah.
parents and students are gonna find that
Even
there.
in the board policy, the same form is attached to the 5,000 series and the 4,000 series because one is HR and one is student. It would be better if we had a student form attached to the student policy and an employee form attached to the HR side,
That makes sense.
And
even if it's a redundant form.
Right. Just title it differently, fill out the same information.
I agree with that. And Angie, I had provided those two samples last time because there was just some lacking areas as you're identifying in the form. And also just, I mean, just from a kind of picky standpoint, the look of our form, I think it could be improved substantially.
Agreed. Yes.
And I still would like to see victim change to target.
Sure.
I think that's a good suggestion.
The other one that was a little bit confusing, and Mike, you can chime in about this one also, but under number 6, the other option in that one as well. So Mike had an employee identify other in that section, and then it,
Other without specificity.
right.
It's just other, I'll just choose other. And what I look at is the federally protected classes. And that's probably what our form ought to reflect, not throw in an other.
Well, if you're going to have something like this on a separate bullying form, other, I think, is important. There are students that might feel they're being bullied, or in fact are being bullied based on maybe an immutable characteristic that you're not identifying in here, and that really is specific. You're not going to have it on the form.
And
So
it
I
should be
do
a
think,
line then.
right,
A
and
line
other
after
with
you have
a
to
fill
little
it in.
explanation of what it is. I certainly think we have to capture as many possibilities as there could be.
Again, because, particularly when we're talking about the kids, we're talking about protecting them from anybody who's illegitimately harming. I guess all harm is legitimate, but that is using some aspect of their existence against them. And we certainly want to cover everything and not let somebody get away with this because it's not a legally listed one. And the same thing with employees, because ideally we want everybody working at their peak performance. You can't work at your peak performance if you're being harassed on some basis, on any basis.
I just had a conversation with someone today because they thought it was funny to call classmate males of short stature a midget in a derogatory manner, and that wouldn't be covered in here. That would be an other. But I know it's hurtful.
so I suppose it depends a little bit on whether you want to just have one all-encompassing form to cover everything, or whether you want to have two separate forms with this form specifically for actual legal harassment that's being sent to the Title IX discrimination complaint officer, whose job specifically is for actual legal violations, discrimination, and harassment, as opposed to general complaints and conflicts, which we also should have a way to report. But if we don't have any other way to report that currently, then you almost have to leave the other in there until we have an alternative.
And my concern with that, I think it's good to have two separate forms. My concern would be parents, guardians that maybe grab the wrong form. Would we have an explanation, a short explanation at the top? This is bullying versus this is discrimination, so they know they're grabbing the right form.
And so on the bullying form, which is called student behavior complaint form, is that sufficient for the student aspect of it? Because they can put anything on there. It could be discrimination, it could be harassment, it could be bullying, it could be any of those.
And the person who reviews it then decides?
Correct.
Yeah.
That makes sense
I mean,
to
is
me.
that sufficient for students? And then this one would be for employees.
Yeah, one of the things we didn't like about this form is it gave the impression that it should be used for reporting bullying, and
Correct.
it's a horrible form for reporting bullying. And so I'd like to make it clear that this form is not to be used for bullying. We have this different form to use. Because this is not a good way at all to report bullying, whether
Right.
it's student would be the primary one, but
I'm a little concerned that it'll get confused as well because we now have the bullying form or the student behavior complaint form up as a Google form, and that's all feeding into our spreadsheet to keep data. And I also have a printable version of that one, so I'm afraid if we get that one confused with this one and parents are filling this one out and it's not getting to the correct place, then we're losing some of that.
So, yeah, so a clear title and then a statement that this is not the form you're filling out for the bullying.
So we could just call it the discrimination and harassment
Sure.
complaint form.
and then something pointed out, we've got a different form for bullying, don't use this other form for bullying. Because this is just not a good way to report bullying.
So I'm actually confused now on what we're doing. The other one, the other form is the revised bullying / student behavior.
It's
Form.
titled Student Behavior Complaint Form.
Okay. And
It's
that,
what I presented last month.
and so then, and that one, if I recall, that can be filled out by a student, by a parent,
By a friend, by anybody.
by anyone. So that
Yes.
covers the student population
Yes.
as the alleged perpetrator.
And it's easy to find.
Yes.
And it's easy to find.
Mhm.
So then, this form, the goal is to cover, is for who is the target population for filling this out?
I think this would be more the HR side of things for employees to fill out if they
Okay.
feel like they are being discriminated
Okay.
or harassed.
So this is for employees, for,
Yes.
okay. And then, my last question is in number 3, do we use this, or will you use this for reporting purposes in terms of number of reportable incidents? Like,
This-
do you want to
this
say
one?
at the end of the year, we had 5 harassment complaints and we had 3 hazing complaints? I mean, to me, that's valuable data.
Yeah.
And where I'm going with this is that having those included together, to me, discrimination is very different than harassment, is very different than bullying and hazing. To me, I would put 4 distinct categories with that other. So however you're collating this data, you can then report on it and say, yeah, we had 3 discrimination and 4 harassment and 2 bullying, rather than lumping those 2 into just 2 categories. If that makes any sense.
So we still want the bullying and hazing on here even though this is an employee form?
I thought I heard no.
Employees could potentially be subject to hazing, for example, or bullying. So I would say we can break it out in those 4
I think
ways.
it's okay as long as it's clear early on that this is not the student bullying
Right.
reporting form.
Well, and our student bullying form doesn't say bullying form on it. It's student behavior, and I don't know,
And really, we did that because we want
because it's more.
everything to be able to be reported on there, and then we can disseminate between what is and what isn't.
Makes sense.
But I think anytime we're gonna keep other, there has to be a line there.
Well,
So
how does that
we
work?
don't have to guess at what they're getting at.
I mean, how is it working in practice? Because certainly we don't want our Title IX discrimination officer to be receiving, complaint after complaint after complaint that has nothing to do with actual legal discrimination or harassment. But is this the kind of thing that happens like once a year or twice a year? I'm not going to really worry myself about it if that
Half a
officer
dozen
gets,
times, maybe?
because this wouldn't be the proper way to go about circle other. I didn't like where I was, I didn't like what room I got placed in, and so this is other. Well, that's not really the role of the officer whose job is to investigate discrimination and harassment.
So wouldn't they just forward that on then to?
That's what I'm saying. If it's only happening once or twice, I'm not going to read you a word about it.
Having done that with two different scenarios here in my short tenure in this office, I felt like since it was submitted on the form attached to the policy, I have to follow through as though it's a Title IX complaint, and there's timelines associated with that, and I have to abide by those timelines.
So is there
I
something in
treated
the
it-
policy that we have to change? You know, that if it's
No,
determined that
it's
it's not
getting
truly
people on the right form, which is the nature of our whole discussion here
Yeah.
tonight, so.
Can we do like divide number 6 into, is this a Title IX complaint and then list these things? Or is this other?
Just
So that
by
it
using
just-
the form, it becomes a Title IX complaint, is what you're saying, right?
That's how I treated
It
it
has to be
because it's attached to the
investigated.
policy that,
Well, and that's what I was saying. Do we change the policy to give you or whomever's in the role some discretion to say, you know, if I get a complaint on the Title IX form that's about I don't have the right color markers in my room, I have that discretion that I don't have to follow all of those timelines and whatever
my
because it's lumped into that.
My read on it was that it was the other category that was causing that confusion. If there was no other, they would recognize this isn't discrimination, this isn't harassment, this isn't bullying, it's not hazing. And they wouldn't have chosen the form, but it was the option of other that allowed them to use it for something else was how they interpreted it.
Well, I have less concern with staff about removing the other than I do with the kids. I think because adults can speak for themselves and, you know, they have that responsibility to speak for themselves.
And if we create
So
another
if it's-
form that has to do with general complaints, we can reference that near the title that says, if you have a general complaint about something that's happening on your campus or with another employee, etc., that doesn't fall into the category of harassment, bullying, hazing, etc. Reference form such and such.
And similarly, on that form, you could say, if you believe your complaint rises to the level of discrimination or harassment, this is the appropriate form.
I think that would clean it up.
And wouldn't that come into the follow the chain of command
Absolutely.
policy?
That would be
and-
the location of that form, in my opinion.
And that could be anything, that could be wide open.
Absolutely. And that form, so if the policy already references chain of command, but that form should be turned into the starting level, the lowest level possible.
I
And
think
what
if
the
we had,
complaint involves the chain of command?
Then it goes to the supervisor of that person, which is the lowest level possible.
And that's clear in,
Yeah, we'll have to look at that and see if it is clear.
okay.
Because that is,
That's one of the complaints I've heard.
yeah.
They, like, I want to,
You want me to go to my principal,
I do
who is the
next?
yeah,
offending
exactly,
person.
exactly.
Then you go to the person above the principal supervisor.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're at the point we want to get rid of other in 3, but keep it in 6, and keep it in 4. But that's the marching orders where
And
We're
a new form
advocating.
is going to be created.
yeah. I also think Pat's point though about discrimination is different than harassment and bullying is different than hazing. I'm not sure why those are grouped together like
Yeah,
that.
we can break those out.
'Cause
That would be
they're
great.
different things.
Well, I thought we were getting rid of other in all the categories, 3, 4, and 6, because this was a Title IX form.
Well, the type of victim,
I think 6, the suggestion was that there be an extra spot, but where they need to specify what it is, as opposed to just circling other.
Yeah, when we looked at 4, as it relates to the school environment, it is either a student, an employee, or an employee applicant.
Yeah.
I can't imagine another. I don't know why we would have another.
And if we're gonna just use this for Title IX complaints, then we wouldn't need the other.
Now, I do see the point of keeping another in number 6,
Okay.
because there's some other category that someone feels offended by.
But it should be specified so that you know when you receive the form what the allegation is.
Absolutely. Don't just circle other,
Yeah.
but we can ask them to specify.
So a line was specified underneath.
Something like that.
so we weren't ready to act on these tonight, but I think that we've had a really good discussion about them, so that when we come back to them next month, we kind of have an understanding,
Yeah.
pretty much what we're looking for, and we won't have to tweak them very much. Any other discussion about those? Then I would move on to item number 5, 9200, the board president policy. So we looked at this last month, but
Right.
it seemed like there were things missing, and now it seems like it's
Is this
complete.
the same one you got last month?
I
No,
don't
there's more
think so.
added to it now.
There's more
Okay, so
added
this
to
is
it.
different from it, okay.
So I think we just got the wrong version of it last
Okay,
time.
great, because the things that I had in my notes were change committees to positions under 9, make sure the language is consistent, in 10 that it be a vocative verb that begins the statement. We get rid of the old 12 because because that was covered already, or that was changed in another policy already.
Right.
And the ones that aren't mentioned here under 9, based upon emails that I got, I think from Teresa and Jane were the ones who sent the emails, and that those were not standing positions. In other words, we didn't fill those every year.
Okay.
So is the list, does it seem complete to everyone now?
There's just one missing.
Okay, which one?
It's the music, because it's like the human growth and development, that they meet every 3 years, correct, Tom?
Yes.
And then I think the gifted and talented one is missing also.
Actually, there is a standing committee for the music that
Okay.
Marie meets with at least every year to see if there are issues.
Oh, and then that's when a board person is appointed if there is an issue?
I believe so.
Okay, so then by
that's-
definition, it's ad hoc for the board, because it's not consistent. Okay, so the music one isn't a standing committee. The gifted and talented is standing. We nominate someone every year. Okay.
3 times?
So then you add a letter I.
For the gifted and
Right.
talented. It's 3 times.
The
Yes.
music, yeah, change the accents to that.
And that's a single
It's
person,
like,
a single member?
Just one member, generally?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we can bring that back. Does everything else look okay?
I have just kind of a picky comment about
Sure.
number 10. Pass the duty just sounds really awkward to me.
It does.
I'm not sure if delegate, if that sounds like it's too, I don't know.
Sure.
Delegate sounds a little better to me. And then if you could just specify in that second sentence there, in the cases of further conflict of interest, the vice president shall pass the duty to appoint to the treasurer and then to the clerk. Now, does the treasurer appoint to the clerk? I mean, if there's conflict with president and vice president, so now we're at, and
Right.
treasurer,
And-
then how does that, there's something missing there.
Right, and that's where the term delegate gets us into more trouble. Who does the delegating rather than the passive voice the thing is being passed to? So if we change it to delegate, then the vice president shall delegate to the treasurer, and the treasurer shall delegate to
Clerk.
clerk. Does that cover it? And we'll need more verbiage in there, but.
I'm not comfortable, I mean, pass the duty just is a bit awkward, and I
It
just
is,
think it's
yeah.
lacking in that last line there.
What does our president's policy say? What language we use in the policy for the president's duties?
This is that
It's there.
policy.
But there's a policy,
To a point.
is it to a point?
Yeah,
But there's a
it's
different,
green and it's, oh, you're looking.
or maybe it's the vice president's policy that I'm thinking, or policy that I'm thinking of. There's some language in there. I can't remember if we use the language we use. I mean, delegate does, I think, sound better than pass the duty,
Sure.
but at some point, if we're reaching all of this, we better make sure nobody's missing at the next meeting, because we don't have a quorum, so. Better hope that never happens. If we ever get down that far with conflicts, we're in trouble.
Okay, I can check through the VP policy and see if there's a better
Should there be
The
an
VP
order
policy
of
succession for,
duties of the vice president consist of the powers and duties of the board president in his or her absence or during his or her disability, as well as other powers and duties as determined by the board.
No, it doesn't really give
because
us-
it doesn't get it. Okay, I'll figure out a better way to say that, and that would be a friendly amendment, I would assume.
Well, we're gonna bring it back anyway, so.
Sure,
So
okay,
we just bring it back next month.
yeah.
I feel like we're not taking action on these things, but we're having really good discussions and making really good changes, so
That's how we get it to
it
consensus when we
there.
finally bring it to the full
Okay.
board.
All right.
then we don't have to change it as often.
So then I would move on to number 6, item number 6, policy 9305. We talked about that last month and the concept of reviewing the list of attorney firms rather than just having a list. And I guess I'll ask you, Tricia, what do you think of this?
Well, if this
So-
is all it was intended to be, I have no problem with this.
It is.
Okay, that's very
Well, I
different
think-
from an annual review.
Right, but this doesn't speak to approving a list. And we do have later coming up the process of approving the list. And so is there another, I don't remember seeing another policy ever that talked about approving the list. So that either has to be in here or we get rid of that practice.
And just add it after number 1 for approval. So you have that whole
A
sentence.
list of all your,
Or the board should
For
be,
approval.
provide a list for approval. Anywhere in there it can fit.
right, it just has to be there.
Right.
Or we don't have to do it. We can make this job easy.
Is there a need to have any reference to a process by which a particular firm wouldn't be approved?
I
I don't
don't,
even know what I'm asking for, to be honest.
I think the idea was to just keep an eye on expenses and kind of be made aware of
Yeah.
which firms we're using.
I would worry about the board having the expertise to make that decision against the recommendation of the administration.
But we still could, even without a policy saying it. I mean, the majority of the board at any time could say, well, guess what? This is what we're going to do, we're not going to do this. And I mean, you could change this policy if you wanted to and then immediately change it. So I think as long as we're being advised of it.
Bob,
and
did you have
I think
anything
we're
to
fine
add?
with it.
Relative to your last comment, and yours also, the review of actual expenses really has nothing to do with this policy at all.
That's true, we
What you
talked
see
about that
quarterly is the
before.
review to see if you're on track for budget and see if anything's flaring up. And that's just a matter of the board asked me to bring that, and I'm bringing it quarterly, and we sum it up. So I think we need to keep separate the policy,
Right.
which, as it's going to be written, perhaps asks me to annually bring a list of law firms, if that's what it is, for approval. Not to be confused with the quarterly report that has nothing to do with the policy. Perhaps my error, because introducing that quarterly report every quarter, I reference the policy. I've changed that since. That quarterly report is not
Oh,
going to
okay.
reference the policy.
But that,
Because
so that quarterly report should correlate with the approved firms from the previous July.
it probably will be a subset of them, because
Sure.
we aren't going to use all of them,
Right.
yes.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
So as it's written right now, you would just bring us a list, it wouldn't be an action item. If we add for approval, then it would come to us as an action item for us to approve. So I guess it just depends on which way.
Correct. And although it wasn't a review, it was a limited review at best. The old policy didn't suggest for approval either, but it was brought to you and we did ask you to approve it and you stamped it and we moved on.
So basically it was to be able to ask questions. Bring it, the list if we have questions. I mean,
And
I'm
just to
fine
know
with
who the
that.
firms were.
And to
So-
bring in a recognition to maybe the public as well as the board that we access different law firms for different
Right.
legal advice and specialty areas, and it's not just the attorney for the board, it's a variety of law firms for a variety of reasons.
And that's a good thing to
Bring
put in front of
awareness to
people
that.
once a year.
Yep.
Well, and my question on this is, if we have for approval, and say in the course of a year, there is a firm that comes up that just appears to be the best firm, they weren't anticipated, that delays on your end, presumably, then whether or not you can move forward, the firm can get moved forward on the work. So, because just anticipated to be used doesn't mean they're going to be used, and it doesn't capture who else could potentially.
I've
So
read
you're
that
arguing
number.
for keeping it the same?
Yeah.
To order more flexibility?
But then it doesn't come to us as an action item, it comes to us just as, much like your quarterly review does, you bring it to us, we see the list, and then,
Yeah.
of course, we can go from there.
Since I've been here, I've looked at number 2, wondering what the word additional means. Number 2, the Board of Education shall retain additional legal services for specialty representation, such as labor negotiations. Could additional mean in addition to what I already brought to you
Yeah,
in August?
good.
That's the way I read
You
it.
could
The example
say
isn't the
that.
best because who we use for labor negotiations is actually one of the listed,
Right.
Yes.
one of the listed firms.
And if we
but-
knew it ahead of time, we'd be foolish not to put it in the list. I mean, if
Right.
I anticipate use of any law firm, I'm going to put it in the list.
But aren't there those occasions where our insurance company uses a firm? You mentioned
Yeah,
it the last time.
I think
That
we're
wouldn't be
covered
one of our
a little bit
usuals.
there because we're not incurring the bill and we're not really
Okay.
hiring them.
Okay.
We're working with them, but we're not hiring them.
Does the
So-
way it's worded now seem
I
the
feel
most
comfortable.
workable way?
I feel comfortable the way it's worded now, allowing myself to still access free legal advice through our insurance company.
Right.
I don't think that is going to be compromised. I like the recommendation about for approval, unless, of course, you don't want to have approval and you want it presented to you once a year. You could still take action on it saying, we've seen it. It's whatever you want, thinking.
If there's some kind of problem, we can always put something on the agenda and discuss the firms, right? I mean, I just don't feel like, we're not gonna do a review, like you said, so it's really an information item. We're trusting administrators to choose the legal firms that are gonna best,
Well, we're trusting them, but we're also saying, but bring it to us so we can take a look at it and we can always speak up if we want to. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Which is different than we do for 99% of the people that you work with, that you use for every other thing across the district.
Right.
You don't normally do
that's a
that.
really good point.
My opinion would be when this policy was created, it was created. So you add an assurance, the superintendent's hiring legal firms. Random person working in the district isn't picking up the phone incurring legal costs because they thought they needed a lawyer. I think that's probably the heart and soul of this policy in
Right.
that we do retain a variety of firms, all goes through the superintendent or his or her designee. I think that's the heart and soul. WASB offers some free legal advice, we access that whenever possible. I think that's really the heart and soul of this policy and its original intent.
Well, I'm comfortable the way it's written right now, in this form. Is there anybody who's,
I'm fine with
Like,
that.
I think the example is a bad example. I think we ought to take the example out. That isn't really part of a policy anyway.
The such as labor
Such
negotiations.
as labor negotiations.
Yeah, I just thought it was a bad example because we have that one covered.
Well, we don't want to replace it with such as a music debacle.
Right.
There we go.
Right. You
We
know,
replaced it and just period, left number 2 as needed,
Yeah.
period.
can we change that? That would be a friendly amendment, right? We could still approve this.
Oh, we still have to see it one more time at the board level, so
Right.
when you see it at the board
Oh,
level,
okay.
we'll have those changes in it based on the recommendations from tonight.
All right.
What about number 1? Do we want to sneak the words approval in there
No,
somehow?
I don't. Does anybody else feel the need to seek that, to put that in?
I'm fine with it either way. If it doesn't say approval, then don't bring it as an action item.
I'll bring it, no action, just like I do the quarterly report then. You'll see it annually, you'll see the other ones quarterly.
Okay.
If another law firm is added during one of the new quarterly reports, I'll certainly bring it to your attention. This report looks different than the last quarter because we added this law firm. Here's why we added it, da-da-da-da. We'll have a little discussion. That will provide an opportunity to see it more often than annually. You'll see it quarterly then.
Right. Well, then I would seek a motion to recommend to the full Board of Education the approval of revisions made to policy 9305.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. And then lastly on our list is policy 5120, K-12 assignment of students to schools.
So specifically, I'm bringing forward the in-district transfer form. Last year, we redid our boundaries to create neighborhood schools. And I think at that point, the blue forms, as they were called before, were cleaned up quite a bit. But we're still receiving quite a few in-district transfer forms. The first 2 make a lot of sense, and they're very black and white. Students who will be moving within the first 9 weeks of the school year may be enrolled into the school for the attendance area to which they are moving. The second one says if a family moves out of an attendance area but would like to continue in that school for the rest of the year, that would make sense. The third one is what I'm really struggling with because it's really left up to the interpretation of anybody who fills out the form. So it says that on a limited occasion, a request to transfer for unusual educational reasons may be initiated. So I've seen unusual educational needs as parents who want their child to go to a school because they went there as a child. Parents who maybe the grandparents live over that way and there's daycare options over in that area. It's really left up to whatever the parents write down as an unusual educational reason. And then if I say no, they say yes, it is for my family. That's an unusual educational reason because it's not outlined in here what that specifically means. So I really have no guidance with that or really any footing if I am denying a family. If you're looking at programming within schools, specifically elementaries are very, very similar. If there's an unusual educational need with an IEP,
IEP placed them at that time.
yeah, they're IEP placed so that there wouldn't be a need for this in-district transfer form.
Okay.
My suggestion is that we omit that third point on there. I think it's confusing to families.
You know what I think it's important. I think it should stay, but I think you should have a clear section above that that defines unusual educational reasons.
Yeah, this is one of the complaints I've received from coaches is parents using this in order to. Everybody knows he's transferring for pick your sport, and so they use this. So I agree with the effort to limit that and define it, but I can also think of some things that could be good reasons to. What if we have students A, B, and IP, for example? I wouldn't want to prevent an East Side student from taking AP at West or a West Side student from taking IB at East if that's the reason they wanted to transfer, or if they wanted to do the automotive program at East. I think we have some ability to have West kids do that anyway, but there's legitimate reasons for doing it too.
I think it's confusing to have that on the form. I think that if parents bring forward a request or a concern to me or the principal, certainly we're going to talk about that and figure out what's best for the child. But we have to give a form to any parent who's requesting it. And if you have that option on there, that parent, because in their mind that's an unusual educational need, they automatically think that we have to grant them whatever they're asking for and for whatever reason.
But
But
when
if
we
we
talk about
clarify-
this in, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but if we clarify examples of what does constitute, and maybe more specifically what does not constitute an unusual educational need, that level of clarity would certainly help, I would imagine.
And add something in that, submission of this form does not guarantee
Yeah.
approval.
When we talked about this before with Jeff Lindell, he was using the term educational in order to try to defeat all of those non-educational, like the sports examples. Academic might be a better term that might narrow it in a bit further. The tech is the one that I thought of. The AP, well, it depends on where you want to go to college and how you want it to count. So that might be significant as well. But yeah, we absolutely have to define it more carefully so that we can't have parents using it illegitimately. That's the central issue.
Tom, did you have something to add to?
One of the things we also have to remember about the APIB, which is an absolute educational desire, it has also been used, especially in the athletics, because they know that if we say I want to go to West for AP or I want to go to East for IB, we don't want to deny that. So if I'm an athlete who really wants to go there, I can make that statement and we almost automatically say yes. And it's caused some real hard feelings between the two schools.
But do you ensure that they then enroll in those classes? If they enroll in those classes, then I feel like the sports is kind of a,
Secondary.
Well, Tom, one of the problems there is we can't tell a kid, no, they can't do AP.
Exactly.
They could have no aptitude for it whatsoever, and they could still take the thing and start in order to play the
So
sport
that-
they
Drop
want.
out in several
That
weeks.
becomes one of those issues. It really is a hot button, and you know,
So,
if I talk to the people on the east side, they'll say, well, they know that if all they have to say is I want to do AP, or vice versa.
Well, maybe you have to remain enrolled in AP and actually pass the AP classes.
Absolutely.
Conditional placement.
I think it's the same as, I live in the Franklin district, but I want my kid to go to John Marshall for whatever reason. If you bought a house on the west side, your option is AP.
Yeah, but there's a big difference. The difference between elementary schools isn't as significant as the difference between whether my post-high school plan is AP classes versus IB classes. There's a big difference. For me, the few times that a student athlete uses it to transfer, I would be willing to accept to not prevent the times where a student is actually doing it legitimately for the AP versus IB. But I think they should have to remain enrolled in it.
absolutely.
would there be another way for a student to ask for a transfer to another school besides
Well-
this form?
If we're talking about sports is the issue, eligibility, we can deny them eligibility for varsity sport if they change schools.
And that is already in here.
Yeah, but we can, you know.
Keep in mind, there are a couple sophomore eligible AP courses, but most AP courses are junior, senior. So if I know I want to go to West for AP, I might be going in my 9th grade, right, in my freshman year, because I want to go to West for AP. We have historically checked to make sure that they enroll in at least one AP class, but that satisfies the requirement. They attended Wausau West High School. They took an AP class, they met the condition.
How about a new guy question? It sounds like programming K-5 is pretty consistent. I think middle school programming is consistent.
Well,
Do we
yeah,
want
depends who you
to,
ask.
do we want to limit transfers to the high school for programmatic reasons? Am I hearing that, or am I misunderstanding?
There might be other reasons. I mean, the schools are on different schedules. I don't know if that impacts students who work. I guess maybe that doesn't fall under educational, but there's education in working outside of school and the time management and all those things. So I just think that there might be other things that could potentially come up.
I think there could be. If there's a substantial change, for example, in a family structure, a parent gets ill and a grandparent lives in another school area, I mean, there are exceptions always.
Well, we only allow transfer if there's space to begin with.
And
We
that,
want to keep us down to the 90% threshold anyway.
but then that brings up a different issue of enrollment, where we're now capped in some elementary schools, and there's students who were already in district transferred there, and then we're looking at numbers as well.
Is there a way to save that unusual education but make it more defined? Could you maybe look at that for next? It's really a thorny issue because
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be unusual. I've received a number of inquiries over the summer that said, you know what, my child is going to this middle school, and it doesn't offer the same accelerated learning opportunities as this middle school. I want them to change. To me, that's a legitimate request because it's their students' achievement that is at stake. I don't think that's unusual. I don't know where it would fit into this process, though, having just talked through this.
gosh, that could really be a can of worms.
No, I think
When
the
you're trying
words
to
limited
predict-
and unusual were put in there to allow some discretion. But
If you're seeing cases over and over that really don't qualify, specifying that very clearly in what does not constitute educational reasons, I think is important too. So defining both really.
Can we
they
try
say
to
that
make
you
this
can.
tighter?
I
To
would appreciate
leave
that.
some
I mean, I
kind
think
of-
we need to have it a little bit tighter.
yeah, like I said before, I totally understand the concern because I don't think people should just be able to switch however they want to and just cite some educational reason. But in order to switch for sports, for example, But I would hate to put in a rule to try to limit sports transfers that then is enforced against a student who wants to move having nothing to do with athletics at all. And I just wouldn't want to see somebody who has a legitimate academic reason to want to go to a different school denied because we have a rule in place for sports transfers.
Well, we could limit it, you have to take a minimum number of IB, AP classes, you have to pass them, and as soon as you're not taking those classes, you go back to homeschool.
I guess I'm looking at it from another point of view where I'm the child and my best friends are at West, and now I'm not successful in that AP. And now you're saying because you don't want to do AP anymore, now you're going to have to leave the setting that you've gotten established in. You know, it just gets to be extremely thorny. I understand where Angie needs guidance, but I was sitting here thinking about, for educational reasons, as an elementary person, you've got a parent that says, you know, my mother has to have the children at 6:30 in the morning because I go to work, and I can't have them at the school as my boundary. And so because they'd have to get up so early to meet my work schedule, they've got to be at my mother's house. I mean, it just, you know, everybody's got a different reason. It's too bad everyone's not ethical, but I don't know how we cover everyone being ethical. And the harder you try to make the policy tight, you're just, and you know, I know that, you know, we're a public school and we want to serve the people who want their children at a certain place as best we can, because that's going to make them happy. And if they're not happy, no matter what happens at that other school, it's always going to be bad, it's always going to be wrong, and they're going to be unhappy.
Or they might forget about it in 2 weeks and it'll be just fine.
Well, sometimes, yeah.
I think I agree with you, Teresa. I think if you try to manage by exception, that you're going to end up in places that you don't want to be at the end.
No, I don't.
For everyone.
Yes.
But I don't think we can remove 3. I mean, revision, yeah, but I
agree.
it needs to stay in some.
Maybe there could be some kind of robust
You need something
investigation
to be able
of
to
that to kind of
Yes.
weed out.
And that's a reasonable, I mean, so if you came back with, you know, here are examples of whatever you want to call this, whatever the reasons, boom, 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 right?
Or even a chart.
There's got to be
Things
some
that
other, there's got to be some other
reasons that
schools that
probably-
have a similar policy that we could take a look at to see what language.
I looked.
Because there are school districts that have significant, like we don't have any problem compared to some school districts in terms
Yes.
of transferring for athletics, who have tightened it up in recent years because of that problem. So I bet you there's some sample language out there that.
There's some school districts that don't allow movement for anything at all. Violence possibly, then they discuss it. And there's other school districts that say turn in a form and we'll see
Yeah.
what we can do for you. So
Find
it's
something in
really,
between there.
it's really broad when looking at other school districts around the state.
Well, we have to put some teeth in it though too, that if it's denied, you go to the next step, you don't come back to the person that denied it and try and argue your case and bully your way through it. You know, because it comes back to Angie and she said no, and they give her a reason and she still says no, they have to have somewhere else they can go rather than breathing down her neck.
I volunteer
They come
to.
here, yeah, they come to me.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you,
I
Kat.
just think you'd be good at that, very decisive. No.
Well,
Next.
let's look at this one again. Next one too. Maybe we'll find that
Yeah.
happy medium. Okay, I would like to seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And abstentions?